very privileged to introduce the incredible Krishna Kumar, who's going to be talking about transform through trust, the 5 dimensions of trust in coaching. Krishna is a pioneer in the sphere of leadership and executive coaching in India. Krishna holds the firm belief that coaching is enlightening, transformational, and at times magical, almost always healing, and possessing the power to build a healthier and harmonious society. It is a belief that has carried him through a diverse learning journey over the 3 decades, where he has been a senior corporate executive, an entrepreneur, a master tennis coaching professional, interesting, a B school professor, independent board member, and a leadership and executive coach. He's also the founder director of the Intrad School of Executive Coaching. Krishna is an active member of the international coaching community. He is a 2-term vice president, presently the global president, and a member of the governing board of the International Association of Coaching. That's quite a biography. And with that, welcome, Krishna. Hello, Krishna. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much, Varun, for that wonderful introduction. I hope I can do justice to that. But I'll begin by, first of all, welcoming everybody who's on this call. A very good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. It's evening for me here on the outskirts of Bangalore. I'm presently sitting in a wildlife resort somewhere far away from the city. And a wonderful atmosphere to share with you some thoughts on transformation. As Varun said, I firmly believe that coaching is transformational. And I looked at it over a period of time, and the studies I did, the experience I've had in coaching over the past few years, and came to the conclusion that coaching is probably more revolving around areas that I would say specifically the area of trust. The ISEC, the International Association of Coaching, to which I belong, in fact defines it as a transformative process. Coaching, they say, is a transformative process. And if it's a transformative process, I looked at it and said, what part of transformation can trust lead to? And for that, maybe there's no better way than to understand what trust is all about and what brings about trust in a certain context. So I'd like to begin the presentation with a little quiz that I'll share with you. And it's in a business context, a corporate context, where you have 2 members of a team, A and B. And member A, has asked member B to help him with some project for which a deadline ends today. Member B commits to help, but with less than 2 hours left to meet the deadline, A finds that B has not even started the work and so feels betrayed. What can A do? I'm going to ask Anna, who's on the call from WBECS, to please share a poll with all of you and do type in what you believe to be the right answer among the 4 choices that you have, A, B, C, and D in that order. So Anna, if you don't mind, please support the poll.
The poll is launched. Can everyone hear me okay?
It's not unusual to have that particular reply. In fact, I would go on and say that, most of the answers would work with one difference, and that is the first one. And why the first one would be a problem, I'm going to expand in a little more on that particular context. What makes the first one difficult is this. If you insist that your colleague B work late and meet his commitment, what actually happens? Way back some years ago, the Arbinger Institute, which is a think tank based out of the US, had done a study on conflict resolution. And in that study on conflict resolution, they came up with this particular concept of how people get into boxes. And in my experience of coaching, I have discovered that this is probably one of the specific reasons why there is trust deficit in communicating with one person and another, and sometimes even in groups. So let's see the process of how this happens. So here in this context, A meets with B and discovers the work hasn't been done, but A, instead of letting it go, as we would consider in the options B, C, and D, goes on to insist, in fact, complain to B and maybe even sound irritating and say, you need to do this, you got to meet your commitment. At which point B is left with very little choice because he's made a commitment to help out A, and he then stops seeing A as a person whom he liked and respected and was a colleague. Instead, he starts seeing him in a completely different eye. And what they called it at that point in time is A stops being a person and then becomes an object. An object that is very demanding, unreasonable, not appreciative of B's particular problems in life. I mean, the fact that he may have been stretched on that particular day and couldn't meet his commitment. But A insists, B sees an object, B goes ahead and does what he has to do, but he does it under protest. He does it with attitude, which obviously at that point in time A doesn't like. And so A, who used to until that point in time see B as a person, now also starts seeing B as an object. This is a hypothetical scenario, but we can see it in many different contexts in life, in business. I shared that as a conceptual framework, but to see that how simple elements can make us stop seeing each other as people and persons and start viewing each other through what we would call a metaphysical box as objects. Let me walk you through the process. The process is as simple as this, that when you act contrary to what you feel you should do for someone else, that's called an act of self-betrayal. When you betray, you start seeing the world in a way that justifies your betrayal. In this case, B starts overvaluing his workload on that particular day and starts getting very unhappy with A. As a consequence of this viewing the world through this self-justifying manner, his view of reality starts getting a bit distorted. And in that status, we say he has entered a box. The interesting part is, over time, many such situations can take place in many different occasions, not only with A and B, but with so many others. And as human beings, each of us over time end up with many boxes that we carry around. In fact, we are a bundle of boxes. And the interesting part is most of them we don't know about. So what should we do? If we are in this situation of being in boxes, what are these boxes all about? These boxes, in a manner of speaking, I would like to call them as a package, a bundle of these areas of biases, cognitive biases perhaps, or biases, prejudices of all kind, vulnerabilities, limiting beliefs, and fear. Fear of failure is probably predominant in this, to the extent that when you start seeing life through boxes or through one big box for simplicity, we are conforming to a state of being that we feel very comfortable in, even though it can be uncomfortable physically and mentally, but we're still comfortable because it's a known place. In fact, it's a box of conditioned thinking. And in this conditioned thinking box, there exists, as a result of that, a serious trust deficit when you interact with others, because you start seeing people on occasions by the way you act, by the way they act, as boxes which they have caused for you or you may cause for them without realizing it. And people stop speaking to each other as humans and people, but as boxes and as objects. So what should you do next? This is the context in which the coaching can make a big difference. So let's look at how you can leave the box. To leave this box, what I did in my research or in my experience, which I'm sharing with you, is brought together some of my learnings and put it together in a certain framework, which I'm sharing today. It's not necessarily in a linear fashion that you got to follow one after another, but it's important to know that all of them are equally important. All of them bring value to the world of coaching. Specifically, you would find that even if you were to apply one or two or three of these, you could bring about transformation. And all of them relate to the concept of having trust, building trust, establishing it, maintaining it in a given context. So how would you leave the box? What are these 5 dimensions? Let's look at some of them. The first dimension is being aware. The second is being mobile, mobility. The third is active empathy. The fourth is what I call intentionality. And the last one, I have labeled it as trim tab. And I will expand on each of these as we go along. The very first one is interesting because almost a year ago, I had the privilege of being on this same forum of WBECS. I'm very privileged to be invited by Ben and his wonderful team at WBECS. And I spoke on a concept called being aware that you're aware, which is the model I've shared on the screen. And if any of you are keen on listening to that, I'll be more than happy to share the recording with you sometime. The model had 5 elements to it, which was, based on AWARE, which is awaken, willpower, action, reflection, and engagement. And all of them were equally important in the concept of being aware. Awareness, as the famous Buddhist monk said, is Thich Nhat Hanh said, awareness is like the sun. When it shines on things, they transform. So that transformation came up again here. But of importance to us today, all the 5 are equally, in my opinion, valuable to the concept of building trust. But I would like to just pick upon 2 of these areas that probably add more value than the others in this context for today's conversation. And those 2 are action and reflection. And what makes action and reflection so important in the concept of being aware? And why is awareness so important for leaving a box? If you have to leave a box, you must first be aware that you are in a box. I mean, that's fundamental. And most of us don't know that. The way to be aware about that is to actually keep reflecting on actions that you take. As you take a specific action, you reflect. And there is a wonderful tool for that, which again I had shared last time, and I'd like to show it to you again. It was first publicized and by a very famous coach called Tim Galway, whom many of you must be knowing about. And Tim had come up with this concept of the stop technique, which I found to be exceedingly powerful in all walks of life. So wherever you get an opportunity and you believe that there is a situation that requires you to take a stop, please do so. Stop involves stepping back, thinking, organizing your thoughts, and proceeding. Of particular importance is the need to detach, step back from a situation, take an opportunity to think through it, ask yourself the questions of what am I doing right? What do I need to do differently? Having organized your thoughts, decide on the way you want to act. That is awareness. The next step, moving ahead, is mobility. What I'm going to do is walk you through all these steps, and then I'll take the Q&A, because in today's webinar, we don't have a lot of time, but I'll be more than happy to take questions at the end. For the moment, I request you to bear with me and allow me to walk you through all the 5 steps. When we come to the second area of mobility, what exactly is mobility all about? Let me take you through another situation. And I will ask Anna to show put up the second poll. Here we have a context in which there is a firm which is going through tough times, not unusual. There are a large number of layoffs likely. One of your best performers is showing signs of deep anxiety, which is reflecting in her work. What could you do, should you do? Options A, B, C, and D. And Anna, if you would be so kind to put up the poll. And that is, not surprising either, because I have earlier received a similar kind of a response to the poll. And like I said, there is no real specific answer that's best. But in the context of trust, I'm going to walk us through the path called mobility, and we will come to realize that probably the answer C, I don't know how many answered C on that one, Anna, because C for me is the real answer for this particular poll. So moving on to the next one, what is conformity? When you are in the conditioned thinking box, which is also a conforming zone, It means that we tend to believe and take comfort in the past. The conforming zone is a place which is not necessarily comfortable, but it's something that is known. So even if, for instance, you don't have a boss that you particularly feel good about, you're still in the conforming zone. You're stuck in bad traffic, you're still in a comfort zone, because even though it's physically or some ways mentally uncomfortable, it's an area that is known. It's people who are known. And when you are in a comfort zone or a conforming zone, you also take a lot of time, you spend a lot of your time managing the present. Because at that point in time, looking beyond that is a scary thing. Like in this particular case, she was very uncomfortable thinking of the future, worrying about whether she would be, one of those laid off. Keeping that in mind, the fear of failure comes in. You are in a zone that we can best describe as a zone of panic. And we ask ourselves, what is it we need to do to move this person from this panic zone to another area that would make her feel so much better? And that area, the movement of that is called mobility, which in many ways is the ability to move or be moved. Again, an expression that I've borrowed from Tim Galway. The movement is critical here. How does one move or be moved? If you remain where you are, you will, even though you know that you are in a box, you must be ready to embrace the change. In fact, one step more than that, the changes that can happen within changes. How would you move there? To do that, the answer to that lies in us taking up a new task. Being able to distract ourselves from the distraction of a potential layoff, which may or may not happen. You need to move into doing something new. Distract yourself in a positive way and move into what is known as a learning zone, which allows us to embrace the future. It allows us to, builds in us the courage, the excitement that the future is not something that's scary, but it's something that we can embrace happily. And that's the phase that comes in mobility. So mobility is all about moving from a fearful area to a learning zone. I move on to the third part, which is that of active empathy. We all know what is empathy. Empathy is feeling for somebody, thinking like someone else, being able to understand the other person's situation is empathy. The difference I've brought in here is active empathy. Active empathy goes one step beyond transposing ourselves into someone else's shoes. Walking in their shoes is one thing, but we need to do one step more than that. Empathy, in the process of being empathetic, you can ask these questions. Do I know what challenges, B was facing when A asked him to do something? Indirectly, was A adding to these challenges? The fact was there any boxes that blocked possible solutions on both sides when you tried to come to a resolution? And how does one person feel about supporting another? How could that person help? When we ask these questions, it allows us to go a little deeper into understanding somebody else. But asking is only one part of it. The other part of it is to take it to the active part, which means you need to act on it. Most of us stop with this, feel very good about it. Even when we are coaching, we feel it's enough if we were to understand the other person's situation. But to go one step further is to actually step forward and help in the way you should. And when I say help, of course, I would stop short of saying giving suggestions and advice and so on, because as coaches, that's not something that we do. But more importantly, sending the message that you are ready to reach out to support that person in his or her journey. When I spoke about stop resisting, that's another aspect that comes, because as you reach out to help somebody, whether you're a coach or not, often our boxes come in the way. And that's what I wanted to expand on a little bit, because when our boxes come in the way, and we all know that in the world of coaching, listening is so very important. Again, I would like to take a step forward and say, let's go beyond the listening into what is called deep compassionate listening, which is active empathy, where you try to listen to navigate the client's boxes. The box in which your coachee is, or boxes, you try to navigate and figure those out through deep listening. But in doing so, we need to be equally sensitive to our own boxes that might come in the way of understanding the client's boxes. We have our own. And to do that, you need to do what is called, in behavioral sciences, they've called it unconditional positive regard, which means you accept the client unconditionally and in a positive way. And finally, you come into the element of being compassionate, which is going beyond empathy, as I said, and stepping forward to support. All this happens in the active empathy phase. The next phase is that of, and not necessarily, as I said, linearly, but the next element I would say, or the dimension of trust, is the concept of being, of intentionality. What is intentionality? Let me expand a little on that too. And for that, I'm going to request again, Anna, for your help. Can you, put up the third slide? Thank you.
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and mute you again, Krishna. Sorry we have to do this, everyone, but I'm going to go ahead and launch the third poll here in just a moment.
Anna, because that's interesting that we had almost a balanced answer on this one. So maybe when I created these questions and answers, it was interesting. I mean, that people, and we have a lot of people who are coaches on the call, and I'm sure many of them would have selected what they believe to be the right answer. And like I said earlier, there's no such specific right answer except in this context. So the word I had mentioned out there is, how would you start the journey? And to start the journey, we speak about something called intentionality. Intentionality is, again, a concept that has been spoken about a lot. And in the context of coaching, once you are in a situation where you realize you're in a box, you have got that awareness, then you become mobile. You decide to leave the box. You're open to that. You also figured out that through, with the support of a coach, you figured out that there are other boxes which are blocking you. And more importantly, now comes the question of, where do I go? I'm leaving the box. The world is huge. I have these dreams that I want to chase, but how can I decide where to go? And that's where intentionality comes, because my potential is one thing that it's anchored in hope, but where does the hope come from? And the dreams and desires that we have, they are the fuel to our passion. And when you have the passion, it will in turn help you find purpose, which in other words we can call intention. But with intention comes the need to be able to visualize it. To be able to have clarity on your intention, you need to visualize it. And more often than not, we stop here. But intentionality takes it one step forward. And it takes us to a point at which we say repeated visualization moves intention to intentionality. In the world of sport, to which I belong, many coaches do this. When they are training even top athletes or even little kids who have big dreams, they tell them this. They say that, if you have dreams, what you need to do is take 20 post-it stickers and on them write your dream. I'm going to win the World Cup. I'm going to be a great champion, or the Olympics, or whatever it may be, and stick it everywhere. Stick it on your pillow, you stick it in your wardrobe, you stick it on the bathroom mirror, you stick it in your kit bag, you stick it everywhere, and you see it all the time, and you dream about it repeatedly, because only then will it anchor itself in your mind. So intentionality comes there. And with intentionality, we have another element that's very critical, because even as you move up the ladder of intentionality and your performance peaks up there, often we reach what is called a plateau in performance. At the performance plateau, the danger that we face in the performance plateau, where our performance, in a manner of speaking, gets stuck. You are unable to go forward or backwards. You're just stuck where you are. And many people, even champions, have faced this. You start having self-doubt, and that is a cause of trust dilution. Trust in yourself, trust in the systems, you start worrying about it. And the only way you can overcome that is by creating a new plateau. a new climb, till you reach the next level of trust dilution. It's important that when you are in the plateau, intentionality requires us to stay with our purpose. And only if we do that were we in a position to continuously climb and reach where we have to reach. I mean, I've shown this schematically, but the idea was that whenever you plateau, don't get stuck, keep moving, stay with your purpose. Intentionality has both repeated visualization and keeping constant on our purpose. The last bit is an interesting part. It's called trim tab, and it's the part I like the most, simply because I read about it. I was very inspired by reading about a person who was probably, for his time, one of the great inventors, philosophers, architects of his time, a person called Buckminster Fuller. And he, in fact, it's written on his grave, his tombstone. It was written, "Call me trim tab." He believed in it so much. He said that every human being has the ability to be a trim tab. And what is a trim tab? You can see that in the image out there. On an aircraft or on an ocean liner, they move these huge multi-ton vehicles through water, through air, using a rudder. That's how the captain of the vessel will steer the ship. But what is less known is that the rudder in turn is moved by a much smaller piece of metal called a trim tab. A very small piece. That little piece has the ability to move this huge, gigantic ocean liner and an airplane. What Buckminster Fuller said, if that little piece of metal can move this huge tons of metal and people and all the rest of it, why can't we as coaches, why can't we as people, each of us in our own way, act as trim tabs? So leveraging trust is probably one way for us to act as trim tabs and bring about transformation. We have instances of this. We have many instances of this. And before I give you one illustration, let me also take the opportunity to share with you that the IAC coaching masteries, there are 9 of them, revolve around some of these models. And I've just take a few minutes to expand on the fact that in each of these 9 masteries, all the 5 dimensions can come into play. It's important to know that it's just not one mastery that's linked to this, but for the sake of time that we now have, I'm just illustrating with 1 or 2. For instance, being aware is processing in the present. Active empathy is engaged listening, though it could also be expressing and clarifying. Intentionality is setting intention, but it's also linked to expanding your potential, and so on. Mobility can be inviting possibilities, support systems, and all the rest of it. But what I wanted to share with you is most coaching models, and very much so in the IAC, have all the 5 dimensions that I listed. Transformation through trust is what I wanted to emphasize, and I'm going to end the presentation with a wonderful illustration that I couldn't but resist sharing. A little more than a month ago, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who lives in Hong Kong, and her name is Bonnie Chan, and Bonnie and I have been colleagues for a long time in the IAC and otherwise. She's a good friend. And in 2011, Bonnie was very inspired by the fact that she was actually coaching people in mainland China from Hong Kong, and she said she had coached about 12 of them without ever seeing them, and it was all done on the phone. And at some point, she came to this thought that I do not know what these people look like. They don't know what I look like. I'm coaching, and it seems to be going well. It's possible that, hypothetically, it's possible that these people could even be visually impaired. They could have some other form of impairment, but I didn't know that. And that thought led her to go a little deeper into it. And she, projected the idea. And the first one was, in China, there was this saying that people who have visual impairments have a quiet heart and a clear ear. And she said, wow, if that's the case, they could make great coaches. That awareness came as a result of this. She moved it forward to the next step where she said, traditionally, people with impairments are looked upon as people who need help. They are help seekers. Can I move these people to a status of being help givers from help seekers? To help her in that task, she also looked at it and she said, in which case, people who have that kind of impairments would typically have, and we all know this, an enhancement of other senses which would make them so much more alert to a context like coaching. This was the assumptions under which she worked, but she didn't stop with that. She took the help of the IAC chapters there. She took the help of NGOs. She took the help of government. There was some kind of funding that was offered. She stayed with the purpose. And between 2013 and 17, over a 4-year period, over 110 hours of training, she was able to actually get these people certified in last month, in the month of May. 10 people graduated as coaches, including someone who was a very young person, all the way up to a former senior corporate executive who had in recent times lost his eyesight, lost his job as a result of that because he couldn't do work, and all of a sudden found himself with a new career. This was absolutely an inspiring story. You can see in the image that the visually impaired person is actually coaching Bonnie. I mean, when they're both sitting in a chair and they were all certified out there. And today, they are acting as trim tabs. They are becoming help givers. They run coaching cafes where they offer coaching to people who walk in for free and sometimes for a fee. So what has happened here is building confidence, building trust and self-belief in a community which otherwise would not have been treated as potential coaches. The fascinating part of it was that Bonnie acted as a trim tab with support from a lot of people. These people are now trim tabs bringing about support in society. I leave you with this question. Can you be a trim tab in your own little world of coaching or the big world of coaching? Can you and I, in our small ways, bring about a difference? So with that, I'm going to stop right now. I'm open for questions. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation that I've given you.
If you are happy to share what you're learning at the PreSummit, go ahead and type happy in the Q&A box, and one of my colleagues will follow